This happened to me about 8 years ago. I'd hitchhiked regularly for more than 2 years. This was the last time I ever did. When you hitchhike overnight, there are two options. Either someone offers you a place to stay, or you find yourself a place to crawl into. I always had my one-man tent and a light sleeping bag with me, but I rarely needed them. I'm a rather talkative and friendly guy, and usually those people that are ready to let a single young man in their car and enjoy his company don't mind offering said man a bed or at least a corner in the garage at night and a shower in the morning. I'd been on the road for 6 days, and every single night I was lucky enough to score a bed. The second night, I had even been invited to come along to a house party. The third night, I was offered to join some sort of family reunion where a father met his kids for the first time in years. But I politely refused because his ex-wife obviously minded having a smelly stranger around. In return for being polite, I got a beer and a pack of yogurt and was allowed to sleep in the car. I think when you hitchhike, it's best not to have a fixed schedule or routine. It is much more pleasant to follow whatever recommendations the locals give and drift day by day just a bit closer to your destination. Hitchhiking is not really a way of travelling. I think it's more of a way of thinking. Away from get from here to there thinking, towards a more zen-like, the journey is the reward mentality. Still, those 6 days, I got pretty far. I hadn't tried very hard, but I managed to get about 2/3 of the way to my uncle's place. I started on Monday, had 6 days of luck, and just when God was getting ready for his day off, my luck disappeared. An older lady took me off the highway and dropped me at a rather desolate country road. There were still cars driving, but the sun was getting ready to kiss the horizon. If there's something you learn as a hitchhiker, it's that when dawn comes, no one trusts strangers anymore. No one trusts the lone, unkempt man that stands at the side of the road waiting for a ride. And if you are a lone, unkept woman standing on the side of the road, you better not trust those cars that stop for you. After half an hour of sticking my thumb in the direction of approaching cars, I realized there was barely a chance to get a ride, and certainly no chance at all to get a bed. I started walking off the road and towards a small forest. It's never good to sleep in the open. The police will bother you, or drunk strangers might visit. Forests also give you cover in case you have to do your business, and they keep wind and rain away. In general, when my tent is in the forest, I sleep better than when it's at the side of the street. I had set up the tent and gathered wood for a small fire. My camp was just a few steps from the meadow that bordered the forest, not too deep inside the woods. I settled down, hummed a song to myself, and tried to read with my flashlight as the light source. The wood was too wet, and the fire produced more smoke than warmth. I had read 3 pages when I heard heavy steps somewhere behind me. Branches breaking, heavy, soft steps. Bear. I was up on my feet with a flashlight in the left and a thick stick in the right hand. The flashlight was not able to reach far, and all I could see were trees. I stood and listened for 5 or 10 minutes. The light flashed from tree to tree, but the steps had stopped. Shouting keeps them away. Shout with a loud and deep voice, and they will keep their distance. You want to seem like a big animal. I shouted from the depth of my lungs. Instantly, the steps returned. They were louder, heavier, faster. They came towards me from somewhere to the left. My flashlight searched for the source, but wherever I shone was nothing. Suddenly, I saw the large, brown body moving towards me. It flicked from one side to the other, rushed through trees. The huge stag jumped out so close to me that I felt the warm air of its body brush against my arm. It ran past my tent. Seconds later, he had disappeared again between the trees. The footsteps faded into the distance. For a few more minutes, I searched the area where the stag had come. I wondered whether it was my shout that upset it, or whether there might have been something else. With the flashlight in my hand and the stick at my side, I tried to read the book again. This time, my back leaned against the tent. I read a page, then read it again. Even when I read the page for a third time, the words still refused to stay in my head. I gave up. I left my small collection of food in a plastic bag outside the tent. Then I myself crawled inside, pulled the zipper shut, made sure the knife was at my side, and closed my eyes. Nightmares. The whole night, just nightmares. Nightmares of something chasing me. Nightmares of someone catching me. Nightmares of someone cutting me open. Nightmares that ended with my death. But each time the imaginary world turned blank, I sank right into the next imaginary forest, right into the next chase. I woke up at 5 a.m. Birds were already singing, and through the thin plastic of the tent, I saw the first morning light. The uneven floor of the tent was uncomfortable. There were cold, hard lumps of soil under the plastic, but I was sure that I had cleared the space before I had set up the tent. For about half an hour, I tried to sleep. There was a stirring outside the tent. Some animal rummaging through the underwoods and shaking leaves. Something struck the tent. A loud, roaring moan. I sat up and slowly opened my pocket knife. The movement continued, more vigorously and loudly. Something repeatedly hit the ground. I was too focused on the stirring outside. I didn't notice the movement under the tent's floor until a dent grew right next to my leg. The dent in the plastic rose from the floor to nearly the height of my leg. I pulled my leg away. The dent stopped, shrunk a bit, and moved slowly under the plastic to my other leg. I quickly pulled my leg away, pulled the zipper of the tent open, and crawled out. There was a fawn on the floor right next to my food bag. Its head was in my direction. It made a faint huffing noise. I hesitated. I didn't want to get attacked by a deer for approaching its fawn. The fawn struggled to get up. I looked around, but I couldn't see its mother. I got on my feet to sneak away. I saw why the fawn was struggling. There were hands around its neck. 2 human hands with greyish skin. The hairy and dirty arms came right out of the ground. The fawn moaned. There was another hand holding its hind legs. The tent shook slightly, just slightly, but enough to make me understand. I jumped away just before the hand appeared from right under the tent. It brushed my heel, but I jumped just in time to escape. The fawn kicked again and tried to get up. The hand that attacked me disappeared under the soil. I saw the ground moving slightly, like 2 snakes under a black sheet moving in my direction. I ran past the fawn to get out of the forest. I rushed through the trees and back onto the meadow. Then I ran to the street. Only in my shorts, I waved to passing cars, but they all just drove by until I finally stood in the middle of the street. A large black car stopped in the distance. I ran towards it. The driver called the police. I'm not sure whether he did it because I begged him to, or because a screaming, half-naked man jumped up and down in front of his car. I explained what I saw, but I doubt that they believed me. The officers walked with me back to the forest. The fawn's body was ripped to pieces. Part of its leg was pulled into the ground. The neck was clearly broken. The hands were gone. The officer said that I would have to come with them. I asked to at least pack my belongings. They watched while I packed my sleeping bag and finally my tent. When I folded the tent, one of the officers gasped. He pointed to a small hole right below my tent. Inside the hole was a round, soft shape, a greyish object. It looked like a branch, if not for the wrist. They unearthed 3 bodies. They had all been cut open. I read the news articles. The people were identified as hitchhikers. 2 of them disappeared a year earlier, but the other one 2 years before that. Still, their bodies were in perfect condition. Some expert was quoted that the moist and clay-like soil preserved the bodies so well. As a witness, I had to stay in town for a week. The police paid the hotel for me. I was called in twice for questioning. The first time was on the day after my find, on Monday. On Monday, they only asked what I had seen, and when I described the hands coming from the ground, they told me not to invent supernatural stories. My story was dismissed as some sort of vivid nightmare. Their psychiatrists suggested that I must have seen or smelled the bodies, and that my mind created the rest of the story to warn me. On Friday, they asked me to come a second time. On Friday, they were suddenly very interested to hear my other stories. They wanted to know the details of what I had seen. This time, when I described the hands and how they had held the fawn and tried to grab my leg, they didn't stop me. They didn't doubt me. They didn't say it was just a nightmare. They just nodded and wrote it down. Afterwards, I talked to one of the officers. I asked him whether they had any hints as to what had happened. He said that they don't know, and that they likely will never figure it out. He said the whole situation was weird. He said that it was odd that the bodies should have been rotten, but were still in good condition. And, he said, there was fresh meat in their stomachs. I had to stay really late at work one night, and by the time I got out, it was very dark and very late. Usually, when I got to and from work, I take a slightly longer route and avoid the highway because of the traffic. That night, I decided that, because of the time, the highway would be a faster route. Since there'd be few cars and it was a shorter length, it just usually took longer because of traffic. The highway had a bit of a reputation. There were a lot of rumors about dead bodies in the woods that border it, satanic rituals, human sacrifices, and ghosts. You know, the usual sensational ghost story rumors. The only verifiable rumors I knew of were car accident deaths, though. Anyway, that night, the road was foggy and I had my high beams on, just to see past it. It made me a bit nervous because I was remembering all the crazy rumors. I wasn't a believer in superstition, though. So I just reminded myself that the rumours were just that, rumours. Suddenly, I noticed a figure on the side of the road up ahead. It was a young woman in a long white dress and a shawl. I'd say in her early 20s. She looked worn out and she was signalling with her arms for me to pull over. I thought about not doing it, but I scolded myself and told me that if I was stuck on the road at 3 a.m, I'd want someone to give me a hand. So I did. I asked her what she was doing, etc. She said that her car had spun out and went into the forest. Luckily she wasn't hurt, but she was frizzled and could really use a ride home. I smiled at her and told her to hop in and show me where her house was. The car ride was really nice. We laughed and talked. She told me her name was Amy Stone. We had a lot in common, and by the end of the night, it felt like we were friends. When I pulled into her house's driveway, I was almost disappointed, because it meant my time with her was over. I looked over at her, and something was a bit off. The way she looked at the house was with such sadness in her eyes. It confused me. She thanked me for the ride, said she hoped she'd see me again someday, and went into the house. I felt pretty good that I did a good deed for a girl in need, and so I headed home. The next morning, when I was leaving for work, I noticed that there was a woman's shawl in the front seat of my car. I remembered Amy from the night before and realized that she must have left it behind. After work was over, I decided to go to her house and drop it off. I walked up to the door and knocked. However, the woman who answered the door was not the young woman from the night before. The woman in front of me was at least 80. Her skin was sunken in, and she had bags under her eyes. She looked tired, worn out. Her veins were uncomfortably visible through her pale skin. She looked sad, to be honest. Maybe something bad had happened recently. I smiled at her. I figured that this woman must be her grandmother. "Hello, are you perhaps a relative of Amy's?" The woman simply stared at me. I explained to her that the night before I had given Amy a ride home, but that she left a shawl in my car and I came to return it. The old woman gave a deep frown and then closed the door in my face. It confused the daylights out of me. I knocked again, but there was no answer. I took the shawl and hopped back into my car and left for home. I tried to think of why she would react that way. The only thing I could think of is maybe she thought I was lying and was really trying to burgle her or something. The next day I had off from work, so I decided to try one more time to return the shawl. In all honesty, I think the thought of getting to see Amy again was secretly my main motivation. I drove to the house and knocked on the door. It took a few minutes, but soon the door opened and in front of me stood the young woman from the night before, Amy. I smiled brightly when I saw her. "Hi, I gave you a ride home the other night and I wanted to return your shawl to you," I told her. She looked me up and down and smiled warily. "Oh, right, thank you." She took the shawl and held it close to her. I waved dismissively from her thank you, telling her that it was no big deal. "I tried to drop it off yesterday, but you weren't here," I told her. She nodded. "Yeah, I had to go out." "That's fine," I said, "but an old woman, maybe she was your grandmother, answered the door while you were gone, and when I tried to return the shawl, she just closed it." Amy stared at me for a bit, her eyes wide, before finally speaking. "There is no old woman that lives with me." So this happened to me about a few months ago. I had just recently left AMA, against medical advice, from an inpatient drug rehab facility. It was in a small area in the state of Utah called Provo. I had been sent there after completing a 3-month wilderness program. I was originally supposed to be there for 2 weeks, then move on to a sober living situation. After about a month, I got sick and tired of it and decided to leave because I didn't feel it was necessary. Once I left the center, I immediately headed north in the direction of Salt Lake City. I walked for about an hour or so and asked for help from a few people. The ladies I spoke to were very sweet and gave me money, seeing that I was clearly now homeless. One of the ladies asked me where I was going, and at that point, I really wasn't sure. So I told her, anywhere is fine with me. So she said that I could tag along with her. We got onto a bus and travelled half an hour towards town. I think it was called Nepi. Upon getting her off the bus, I helped her with her bags to her home. I thanked her for the money, and that helping her with her bags was the least I could do. After she closed the door, I had no idea where I was. I'm from Florida and had never been to this part of Utah. I had no idea where I could find rides and decided to walk along the highway. I started to walk along the highway, and within 5 minutes, a car had pulled up. The general vicinity was known really well for Mormons who are always very nice, but the other types that aren't spoken much about to the general population are addicts. Anyway, I walked up to the car as the window was sliding down. "Hey man, need a ride? It's not a good idea to walk along the highway. You can get arrested for that." I said yes, without even taking a look at the side of the car, and not really catching a glimpse of the guy. As I opened the car and got in, I realized just how messy the car was. I looked over at the guy and began to think that I might have made a really bad mistake. The man was lanky, hair was a mess, and had a ton of scab marks on his face. We started driving and I began to get worried. What the hell was I thinking? I thought to myself. He began asking me questions, with the first one obviously being, "Where are you headed?" I still hadn't fully decided yet, and for some reason just blurted out the dumbest and strangest answer. "I'm going to Arizona." "What, like the state? You're a long way from there," he said, grinning eerily. Why did I say a different state? Still though, what the hell could I have possibly said after that to sound like I wasn't a homeless hitchhiker? Anyway, he made some small talk, and I was still trying to check out the car when all of a sudden I noticed something slightly poking out the far end of the seat. It could fit in someone's hand, and it was all black. I had noticed he only had his right hand on the steering wheel and had not moved his left hand from the side of his leg. Eventually, we got off the highway into some small and terrifying empty town. We were driving on the main street, and he was telling me that if I was really trying to get to Arizona, that I should go to a gas station just outside of town called the Flying J. I'd never heard of the place, but I figured, screw it, I'll just go there. We made a left when we got smack dab in the middle of this weird and eerie town and ended up pulling into a gas station. He told me to wait in the car and that he would be right back. I said okay nervously and he got out. He walked toward the gas station store and began searching for something in particular. I'm not sure what, but I was trying to decide what to do, which I'm sure most of you would say, get the hell out of there. At this point, I'm slightly freaked out, and the curiosity got the better of me, and I tried to check out what the black object was. I started to pull on it, and immediately started crapping bricks. When I fully got it out, it was a machete. I dropped it on the car floor and was overwhelmed with fear. What the hell was this guy planning? From reaching across the car, I was positioned in a way that I could see some of the back seat, behind the passenger seat too, and saw a few blades poking out some clothes, obviously trying to be hidden. Needless to say, I was freaked. I dipped out and ran straight to the main street and kept heading south behind buildings along the street. After a while of running for my life, I finally was out of breath and began walking. At this point, the town had ended and I was on the outskirts and could see a different gas station. I decided to rest there for the night because, well, I had nowhere else to go. As the gas station got closer and closer, I heard a siren behind me. It was a police officer pulling to the side. He asked me where I was headed, and I explained everything. He said that it explained why they were getting calls about a man fitting that description being suspicious. He asked for some ID, and I told him I could only tell him my social security number because I didn't have any. He said he would keep an eye out, told me to be safe, and to get in contact with them if I had any problems. That would have been an okay answer if I wasn't homeless with no phone and no form of ID. Anyway, I got to the gas station and started asking truckers if they could take me anywhere. But for the first 4 hours, they all told me no, and it was for insurance purposes that they couldn't drive me anywhere. At this point, it was now about 2 a.m, and I felt pretty homeless. There was no way I was going anywhere. Then, a nice woman asked me where I was going, and I said I would pretty much go anywhere. She apologized and said that her and her husband couldn't take me, but there was bound to be a person who could, and that I should make a sign. So, I just decided to look around the building, remembering from past jobs that I would usually put boxes in the outside back part of the store. As I was looking around for a box that could be a good size for a sign, I heard some rustling behind what looked like a generator. I had a really uneasy feeling and could feel eyes of someone pinned on me. Luckily, I actually did the smart thing and just grabbed a box and went back to the front of the gas station that was by the pumps. For the rest of the night, I would switch between going inside and trying to sleep in the room where the TV was with a bunch of seats, and sitting outside, hoping someone would offer me a ride. At around 4 a.m, I went outside to sit back down and hold the sign. The way I faced, the right side of me was where truckers would go and fill their tanks, so in front was the road. The lights would reach the street, but where the grass started, it was pitch black. At least, that's what I remember. Anyway, I could barely make out someone standing in the darkness, not moving. It creeps me the hell out. I could feel the piercing stare pinned on me, but I couldn't really make it out. I went back inside, sat down in the sort of lobby, and looked out the window. He was gone. Eventually, at around 6 a.m, a man came up to me and offered me a ride to Phoenix, Arizona. I happily accepted, and he went to shower at the station, and we began walking. When we finally got to the truck, I hopped into the passenger side and now I had a full view of the entire front and back of the store. As the trucker turned on the engine, I immediately started shaking. Behind the store, peeking out, head tilted and glaring at me, was the machete man. What the hell? I'm so glad someone took me with them. Nobody would have found me if this guy took me. My parents didn't know where I would be or be going, and I probably would be in his basement right now if I decided to leave that flying J.